And a birthday celebration for Jack Brymer.
Playing the clarinet was a natural thing because, after all, I can't remember not playing it, you see. That's the point. From the age of 5, certainly, I can't think of life without the clarinet. I mean, I couldn't think of life without a football or a cricket bat or a tennis racket or a golf stick. In later life, they've all become natural to me, but the clarinet is just a fact of life.
The 27th of January, 1990, the 75th birthday of one of Britain's most gifted and certainly one of the best-loved musicians, is celebrated in a concert given in association with Shell UK at the Barbican Hall, London. Listening to that assured performance of Mozart's Sinfonia Concertante, it seems scarcely credible that Jack Brymer had no intention of becoming a professional musician. His career began as a schoolmaster in Croydon, teaching the odd combination of musical appreciation and physical education. His image with his all-girl classes seems to have been pretty good.
Well, he taught PE, and I suppose anyone who taught PE had a pretty good image to start with. I think warmth was the very first thing that came across. The other thing that came across very quickly was how he could actually make a musical sound out of the most appalling piano. We all used to play the piano and make the most horrendous noises with it. And I'd come up through all the grades, piano playing with innumerable teachers, but no real appreciation of what music should sound like. But hearing Jack Brymer play it was quite a different experience.
I don't think we think of him as a pianist.
No, probably we don't, but he's a very competent pianist, I can assure you. And I can remember him playing the accompaniment to the Earl King and frightening the life out of me. I used to go home and try and emulate him on a decent piano, and I couldn't get near it. But he could really make it live.
So, these music appreciation lessons that Jack took, what were the circumstances in which you went to those?
We used to have them in the downstairs classroom, which was the only one that actually contained a piano. It was a typical school upright piano, appallingly tuned. And he used to stand, as far as I can remember, to do most of the accompaniments. We girls were usually squashed into desks. Having done the singing, he normally then took us through some appreciation. Most lessons consisted of both the singing and the appreciation.
And did you know that he played the clarinet?
No, and I had no idea at the time. And in fact, I rang one of my friends last night and said, "Were you ever aware, when you were at school, that Jack Brymer played the clarinet?" And she said, "No." Neither of us had any idea at all. We had no recollection of him ever playing the clarinet at school. We had no idea he had greatness.
Were all the girls in love with him, do you think?
We all were a little bit. I certainly was, yes. We all thought he was marvellous.
The next great composer to write for the clarinet was Weber. For a great player of his day, Heinrich Baumann of Munich, he wrote no fewer than 3 concertos and a great quintet. By now, it was the early 1800s, and the clarinet was developing rapidly. 13 keys, 6 for the right, 6 for the left, and one for the thumb. And the same system as was used by Behrman in the first performance of Weber's great concertino. It must have been a very considerable feat.
Jack's entry into the music profession was both sudden and unorthodox. The story begins with a surprise telephone call at a not very convenient moment.
Well, the great day arrived in 1947, and I'd come home from teaching in Norbury and was just sitting on the garage roof, which had been bomb damaged quite badly, putting pitch or something on it, when the telephone rang. My wife said, oh, there's somebody says he's Sir Thomas Beecham. So I thought, now, I wonder which of my friends this is, you see, and picked up the phone, and a voice said, oh, Mr. Brymer, I believe you play the clarionet. And I thought, now, none of my friends know that I used to call it a clarionet when I was a small boy. And I suddenly realized that Beecham was a northern chap, St. Helens, you see, and it suddenly struck me this could be Sir Thomas. And he said, I would like to hear you play. Would you come to my place tomorrow? And I did, late. Traffic was, even in those days, not easy. And found this giant of a man, all 5'2" of him, in a white dressing gown with a big cigar, with his fingers and hands bandaged, because he had some sort of arthritis, in this incredibly hot room. Fortunately, we didn't play immediately. We talked about pictures on the walls, and we talked about the weather and the state of the profession, and drank sherry, smoked cigars. And then he pushed about 10 records off the piano and said, now we'll have a little music, and gave the worst performance of the Brahms E-flat I've ever heard in my life. I was about a quarter of a tone sharp. Beecham was never anywhere near the beat. And at the end of it, he said, oh, thank you very much, my boy. You'll be hearing from me. And I thought, yes, I know exactly what I'll be hearing from you. But next day, he came up with a contract, and that was it.
So what was the feeling in the orchestra when Beecham plucked this player out of the relative obscurity of amateur music making and made him first clarinet in the Royal Philharmonic?
I'm inclined to think that it was no surprise, because many of them had heard him or played with him in other fields when he was still a schoolmaster, isn't that right? Mm-hmm. Before. So that even though he had not been a professional musician, he had played with professional musicians. And the fact that they had all been responsible to such a degree in telling Tommy about him and getting him invited to come and play meant that his fame had preceded him. So that I don't think there was quite that sense of surprise as of welcome.
Even so, I've always thought that there was a certain element of discovery almost in Jack Brymer's playing. I mean, a sense of excitement that here he is, like a small boy, having been given the best train set in the world. He's now no longer an amateur player, but he's first clarinet in Sir Thomas Beecham's orchestra.
I suppose that's true. We never got that aspect of it from him. He didn't reveal that to us. As far as we were concerned, he seemed made for it. He slipped into it like into a glove, He was absolutely at home in it from the moment he arrived and blended in with the others so quickly that he might have been there from time immemorial.
But even so, it was a rather audacious thing to do, wasn't it, to take a man from that position and put him in the orchestra?
But Tommy was always audacious.
What was it, do you think, that Beecham saw in you, heard in you? What did he like about the sound you made? Was it the vibrato?
No. I think he liked the particular vocal quality of the sound of some players and not others. I'm not saying me. But he seemed to like people who had a freedom of expression that perhaps some schools of clarinet playing denied him. I mean, he would expect some things of bassoonists, of oboists and flautists, as well as clarinetists, and I don't think he could have got the sort of clarinet playing he wanted from every type of player, and I think he wanted the sort of thing I did. He was quite hypnotic. You could go right through rehearsal, joking your way along. At the end of it, you would think, I wonder what the old so-and-so wants, you see. And you'd turn up at night, and he'd have been marking the parts, mind you, in the afternoon, in his own stubby blue pencil. But when you looked at those eyes at night, for the first time, you knew exactly what he wanted.
We knew exactly what Tommy wanted of us at any time. We could do it without his having to cross the T's and dot the I's. He just looked in our direction, or he'd give us a twinkle, and we knew exactly what he wanted. And the fact that his gestures were sometimes so wild, when he'd roar at the brass, for instance, or the percussion, so and he'd go and say, how do you follow a beat like that? There was no problem. We knew exactly what he wanted. The wind section of the Royal Phil did have a distinctive sound. Mind you, any group of players that played under Tommy was going to have a distinctive sound anyway, because the distinctive sound of orchestras at that time was, to a large extent, dictated by the kind of sound quality its conductor would have moulded with them, because a conductor being present all the time in the way that they don't have today. Today conductors have many orchestras, and orchestras have many conductors.
I think you've had some rather remarkable brushes with conductors in your time, haven't you?
Yes, I wouldn't say they're serious brushes, differences of opinion, rather, but most of them have settled themselves quite nicely. I mean, take Claudio Abbado, who used to insist the little bit in the Fifth Symphony of Beethoven, da-da-dee, da-da-da-da-dee, finishing on an E flat, which, of course, if you play really pianissimo, goes sharp, as you know. So I played it mezzo pianissimo. No, pianissimo. So I played it pianissimo. It goes sharp. Oh, sharp. So I said, frankly, Claudio, leave this to me tonight, you see. And what you do is to go home, go into your workshop, put a little bit of plaster inside that E-flat key so you can't possibly play it sharp. And then you can play it pianissimo and flat. And then you whip it out in the interval and put it away. But conductors don't realize the tricks of the trade. And we, as wind players, as you know, have to be mechanics and have to fix things.
Well, he's a supremely practical musician. I think there can't be anything that he hasn't done. He's played all sorts of music and played in chamber music, orchestras, solos, written and arranged music. So that, for example, I remember having a lesson on the Mozart Clarinet Quintet, and he said, at this point, Emma, you'll find that the viola player will get behind. But don't take any notice, just keep going ahead. And sure enough, when I came to rehearse this piece with the string quartet, that was exactly what happened. And I dealt with it in the way that he told me to, and it all went off very well. He's definitely a practical musician, which is very refreshing.
you think is for you the most memorable jazz session that you've ever played in?
Well, a couple of them come to mind. There was a time I was at Wavendon with John Dankworth and his boys and had a great time there. But on a bigger scale and over a longer period, when Benny Goodman, towards the end of his life, couldn't come over here, he used to send all his stars, people like Peter Appleyard, Hank Jones on piano, Billy Butterfield on trumpet, and all the stars. Slam Stewart was on bass. And I used to go around playing all Benny's stuff with this lot and thoroughly enjoy it, because to me it's a wonderfully relaxing and free form of expression. The improvisatory thing is something I enjoy very much.
Does that come easily to you, the improvisatory part of it?
Except I can't play modern jazz at all. I mean, from about 1947 onwards, I'm out of date.
As well as playing with the Benny Goodman Band, Jack was a resident tutor on a mixed media course at John Dankworth's home in Buckinghamshire.
I remember it very well because he, having had some jazz background in the past, he knew how to integrate with that sort of course. And he also amazed us by showing us all sorts of tricks on the clarinet that I didn't believe existed. He showed me how to play an E flat, a low E flat on a clarinet, which finishes on a low E. And I've never been able to quite master how he does that, but he does it without blinking an eyelid.
You mean he goes one semitone below the proper compass?
Absolutely. And also, in the days when dance bands or jazz bands had live broadcast series, which was a long while ago, somewhere in the late 50s or late 50s, I think, I took it upon myself to decide that for every one of the 13 programs in that particular series to have a classical soloist to play with our band. And one of the guest soloists was Jack. Now, I should preface this by saying that every time we had a classical soloist playing something relatively simple for them, and certainly written properly for their instruments, they would play things in rehearsal quite well, and then one would expect really good players to play that bit better on the air. But they all fell off a bit on the air, no doubt because they had no background in that sort of music and felt a little nervous on the occasion. But not so Jack. Jack strode in, played this piece that I'd written to bring out the most difficult features of the clarinet in one fell swoop. And after one reading, I found it hard to ask him to even play any of it again for his benefit, maybe for ours. And he said, oh, let's go and have a drink now, that'll be all right. And of course, when it came to the broadcast, he played it about 3 times as well, even as he did on that excellent run-through.
Of all the places you've played in, is there one which you look back on with the most affection, I wonder?
Oh yes, unquestionably that would be Glyndebourne, because we spent 16 summers there, and I mean all summer from May to August. And then, of course, we went up to Edinburgh with them anyway, the Glyndebourne Opera. But it was a wonderful place to play, and a wonderful place to live. We lived down there as a family every year, played tennis there, swam, played golf, and had a little music as well. It was really delightful, wonderful people.
Do you think that that sort of atmosphere is conducive to making good music in the evenings?
I'm quite sure it is, because you see, you can do a rehearsal in the morning, you can play tennis, you can swim, you can play golf, you can have tea on the lawn, you can then have a big dinner interval with some of the best wines in Europe, and you've done actually about 8.5 hours work in a day and had a wonderful holiday at the same time.
What's it like actually playing in a pit?
Well, playing in a pit has its own particular problems because you've got to get a different dimension. You've got to project rather more than you'd expect. Though in the shallow pit of Glyndebourne in the early days, this was no problem at all because really getting down to pianissimo was the great difficulty. Excuse me. But there was one day when having a shallow pit was a bit of a peril, actually. We were doing Verdi's Falstaff, and Geraint Evans was up there, and he was waving about this broomhead, beating all his wayward friends out of the way in the first scene in the tavern, when the broomhead came off right over the footlights and smacked Leonard Brain, who was the cor anglais player, right in the teeth. Blood everywhere, you see. And I can see Vittorio Gui's face to this moment, looking in horror, because there's coming teedle-da-dee, pam-pam, 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 which nobody else has to play at all. Absolutely a cor anglais solo. If that doesn't happen, the opera stops. So he looked around in horror, and I just picked up the A clarinet, which fortunately has enough notes at the bottom to play this, and played it. And I never forget the sigh of relief he gave as he heard somebody playing something like the tune.
Do you think that composers always understand well enough what the capabilities of an instrument are?
Well, they usually understand the capacity of an instrument, but very often later they'll discover that they've changed their mind about things.
And you played under Strauss once, who had changed
Actually
his mind,
played
didn't you?
under him once as a conductor, but played with the orchestra while he was supervising many times, because at that time Beecham was recording a lot of Strauss, Heldenleben and other things. And of course there was the famous occasion, which was literally among the very first gramophone sessions I ever did, when the old man, old Strauss, was walking about in an old raincoat, putting marks in the parts over our shoulders. And we got to the end of Don Quixote, and I have to play ta-dee-ba-dee-da-dee-da-da, which is Mark Metz's piano. So I play it, dying away at the end, because this is the dying Don Quixote, you see. And Strauss came, he said, no, 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 he said, now he is old man, now he is not foolish, not a young man. You play this like a memory, and play pianissimo. Well, of course, it's almost impossible to play that thing pianissimo. So I did what I could, and Beecham encouraged me, and I've played it pianissimo ever since.
When do you think you developed the famous Brymer sound?
At the age of 6, I believe. Yes, I was startled to hear that people found my sort of playing unusual, because I'd been doing it all the time.
You're talking about playing with a vibrato now.
Yes, and the sort of vocalized type of playing, rather than playing the instrument as an instrument, to play it as a vocalized perception, in the way that Leon Goossens had always played the oboe.
So, but do you think you got the idea of playing with a vibrato from playing light music and jazz?
No, I'm quite sure I got it from Leon Goossens, whose playing I first heard at the age of about 12. And that revolutionized my whole outlook upon wind instrument playing. I realized that you didn't any longer blow the instrument any more than you blow through your vocal cords. I believe that you support the column of air as you do when you're singing. And Goossens always had done this, and I think I did it from that day onwards.
For me, that has always been one of the lovely things about his playing. It really sounds like a human voice singing to somebody. And I'll always remember going to a concert of his when I was very young and being struck by his ability to really draw people in and make them listen to him with this beautiful sound.
I wonder when you first became aware that Jack Brymer had a distinctive sound himself.
Oh, the first time I heard him play. There's a smoothness and a sense of phrasing, which was something one hadn't heard before.
I'd always admired him from afar because he seemed to be the clarinetist who, for me, had carried on the tradition established by Reginald Kell in British clarinet playing. Just a break away from the very straight and narrow confines of classical clarinet playing as conceived by most European players of that day, to use a slightly looser approach to the tone and the vibrato, and to sound just, to make the clarinet sound human. That's what I felt Jack did that so many other clarinet players didn't do.
It's not very fashionable nowadays to have vibrato. I personally like it very much, and I think if string players and singers are all using vibrato, I see no reason why the clarinet should be an exception to this and should be expected to play like a church organ or something like that with no vibrato at all.
I could listen to him forever. I think he's absolutely marvellous. Yes. And I don't think, having heard his birthday concert, I don't think he has diminished in any way with his 75 years.
I wonder if we've gained or lost anything from the way in which people enter the profession nowadays, because by the standard of 1945 or so, they're surely a bit overqualified. They've got university degrees, they've been through one or other of the music colleges. Are they just overqualified, and are there too many of them?
I think you've gained a tremendous mental power, really. You see, I don't believe that musicians should only be musicians. I believe that every time they pick up an instrument, they're betraying their whole psyche. And I'm quite sure that having a university degree in physics is going to make you a better oboist, even though you may not have been a good oboist anyway. And yes, it is going to help, because it's going to make you a better musician, and that will be reflected in your... It must make you a better musician, because you know more about life. Admittedly, that pure academic knowledge is not the be-all and end-all, but it must have a reflection upon your whole outlook on life.
Certain pieces of advice he gave me probably did alter my playing. Thinking of lessons with him, often he hardly played to me at all, but would rather speak and give me advice that way, which I think is a very good thing, because I think it's bad for a teacher to want pupils to imitate them. I think teachers should just try and bring certain things that are already there in the pupil, just bring them out.
Jack Brymer's interest in young musicians led to his becoming director of the Shell LSO Scholarship from its foundation 13 years ago. The competition covers one instrumental category each year: percussion, strings, brass and woodwind, and an important element is a series of workshops run by leading instrumentalists like Jack himself.
Would you go on to the end of the movement? Da 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 ba bee, ba 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 da da da. 1, 2, 3, 4. Stop. Yes, yes. All right, don't worry. Blow it well and truly out. It's a puzzle what to know what to do about that if it happens in a performance. There's nothing much you can do except to look cool, you know. Look unashamed, and you are ashamed, but never mind. Blow it out from under there, dear. That's another one that can be. Yes. Yes. That's a terrible thing to happen. Same bit. That's it. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Jack has always known exactly what he can do and does it with ease and fluency. And I think that has come over in his relationships as well as in his playing.
Do you think also the sound that he makes on the clarinet somehow mirrors the man? He's a...
Absolutely. Totally.
And also there's a marvellous calm about him. You don't feel that there's frenetic worrying going on. He's almost, in a way, has a spiritual presence that's very calming, and I think you can hear that in his playing.
I think that Mozart should be approached the way it looks to the performer and sounds to the performer, and the way it affects the performer when it's played. And I find Jack Brymer's approach to the Mozart works as totally satisfactory, very enlightening, and refreshingly different, if you like.
He said he hardly listens to his recordings anymore because always there's had to be some compromise, and they never live up to the ideal that he has of how he would like to play the work. And I, in my limited experience of giving concerts, have found this too, that you're always aiming after, you're striving after something, some perfection that's up there that you're hoping to attain. And I was very impressed that a musician in his 70s could still have this approach to music, that he's still striving after definitive performance. I don't know if anybody ever gives the definitive performance, but I know that Jack Brymer's performance of Mozart will always be remembered.
As it happens, Jack Brymer shares a birthday with his favourite composer, Mozart. And perhaps the highlight of this concert, given in association with Shell UK, was a performance of the cornerstone of the clarinet repertoire, the Mozart Concerto.
Thank you so much for everything, and thank you particularly, John, and the LSO. I really think perhaps we should have let Mozart have the last word, but can I just say, please come again in 5 years. Good night.